everyone, welcome back to the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Red Sofa. Very pleased to be joined by Anu Goel, Executive Vice President of Group Parts and Service for Volkswagen Group. Anu's not a speaker this year, but he's taken an opportunity to join me on the Red Sofa so we can follow up on some of the questions we had earlier in the year and talk also about parts and service and after sales. It's such an exciting part of the industry we want to delve into a little bit more. So I want to pick up first, we were on this Red Sofa in Huntington Beach, California about 6 months ago on Liberation Day, if I'm not mistaken, when the tariffs were announced and more or less started to be implemented. And obviously at that time there was a lot of uncertainty, to say the least, about production approaches, about shipping, should we stop, should we go, etc. 6 months later, give me your short summary of where we are and how you sort of view it in the vehicle logistics context 6 months on.
Okay, well, thank you for having me back. I'm sorry I'm not able to join the full conference this year, but yeah, I remember Liberation Day very clearly. Uncertainty is a very good word. I think the uncertainty still exists today. I think the difference is we have learned to deal with uncertainty. And the way we've learned to deal with uncertainty is supply chain needs to have flexibility. Supply chain needs to have a certain level of urgency, and the supply chain needs to have redundancy. And if you did the math in the past, if you did redundancy in our world, it's cost. Nobody wants to spend the cost. But the cost of redundancy today is less than the cost of reacting after the fact in a level of uncertainty. So it still exists. I think we're better at dealing with it, learning from it, and managing it.
Oh, that's an important point, and it's exactly one of the key themes we're picking up across this event in that push for resiliency and flexibility. I'd like to understand what the impact has been or how you're feeling it on the parts and service side in terms of the tariff implementation. What does it mean in the context of your supplier footprint and your service?
Well, one, thank you for asking about parts and service, right? It's for most OEs, arguably one of the most profitable elements of the business that people tend to forget about, right behind financial services or right, in some cases above financial services. The simple answer is tariffs add cost. You have to decide as a company what your priority is. We have decided that continuing to provide service parts is priority number one. And we can get into a whole discussion about bad things that happen if your parts availability goes down, right? So if you continue to provide, now you've got the cost element of it. How do you deal with the cost element of it? And there's several cost levers, nothing that is going to offset the full burden of the tariff. But localization, yes. So our approach has been, let's make the supply chain more efficient. It gets you this much of it. Watch your overhead costs, all those kinds of things, gets you this much of it. Localization, start with parts that are not safety related, that are not tooling specific, that are arguably commodities, and get them set up here. So we are in a huge move towards localization.
So definitely a push there, and that's the point on service coming first. So that doesn't stop. And I suppose there's a parallel with vehicle logistics there too, because obviously the decision was made to continue to deliver and distribute, and not let the tariffs block that.
Yeah, I mean, one slight difference between parts and vehicles. We made the decision to slow down the vehicle supply chain, to buy time to let things settle, right? Because you get a date, oh, maybe there might be some reduction or movement here. That date comes, nothing changes, right? So all you've done is backed up the supply chain, right? Which is why the redundancy and flexibility all comes in. But on parts, from day one, we said keep the supply chain moving, do not slow it down, and if need be, accelerate it by flying. So that there is a distinction between the two.
No, that's such a great point. Well, let's come back to the parts and service. Generally speaking, what would you set as some of your key priorities right now? Clearly service is a priority, but I mean in terms of key areas you want to improve or address in your parts and service.
One that is tough to do, but we're trying, is more transparency upstream in the supply chain. The level of supplier uncertainty, what we call a supplier watch list, is off the charts these days. It's 3 to 4 times the number of suppliers we've had in the past that we do not have transparency to their viability going forward, right? Because they're impacted by all of this as much or more than we are. So we've worked to get upstream tied into what we call watch list suppliers to ensure we have something going. And if we don't, we got to work with purchasing to find alternative sources. Now, those alternative sources, if you get into tooling, now you're adding months, years. You get into soft tooling, okay, that's an option. But we're also looking at alternatives. So there's people in the independent aftermarket today that provide parts that compete against us as an OE. I will argue in some cases they're better than what we have. Now, my quality team may disagree with that, but we can have that conversation all day. But we are starting to look at alternative sources that in the past we never would have looked at.
And does that require some collaboration then on the procurement side for production as well? I mean, clearly because there's a link there, can after sales help to influence that even further?
If you leave it to the machine, purchasing and quality will say absolutely no way. If you bring the customer service element into it and say, if I don't have a solution, it's going to be 10 months before I can fill that order. Then you go back to, have you as a company decided that customer service is first? If it is, then that'll happen. Me talking to my colleagues is not going to move the needle. You need a culture and a corporate philosophy that says customers won. And if you use that, then you can leverage to get some movement in silos.
No, that's such a good point. And obviously we're coming back to an important theme there, that this has really got to be the top priority and orientate around that. Maybe in that context, how are you looking at your network for parts and service in North America right now? I mean, have you been optimizing or changing the footprint in terms of parts distribution centers and how you manage that?
Everything's on the table, right? The thing about after sales is very few people understand what happens, but when the grown-ups take a hard look at the network and the money we're spending, you get asked to look at, do you need this many depots? Do you need to provide this level of service? But if you make the decision, customer service is first. If you make the decision, my order to delivery service, right, overnight or second day stays the same, doesn't deteriorate, the physicals don't change. So the buildings are the buildings. And if you close them, what happens is you're shipping from another location, you're adding transportation costs, and it will be more than the cost of savings in building, right? It's math, right? It's geography and math. So for us, we've decided services first, and we're maintaining the same level of service. Now, if you've done that, what can we do? And that's the $50,000 question right now. First, you have to educate the board and the teams that reducing service actually increases cost. That's not viewed as that's not a common sense type of thing. But you can reduce cost if you take your service level from, let's say, overnight to once a week. Right? But then you're going to add costs on the back end to the company and to the dealers with rental cars, car downs, technician downtime. So if you start looking at the total equation, our network is good. The thing that we are looking at physically within our buildings is, are we stocking the right parts? And when electric vehicle components are in the building, are we best placed to do that? Or do we have someone else do it like we've talked about in the past? Right? So the physical change in our building is what's physically stored in it. And unless we change order to delivery service, the network stays.
Absolutely. Have you also then, because you mentioned the independent aftermarket, now there are some of those who will deliver multiple times even per day in some cases. Have you explored options where you can even increase delivery and service in some cases?
Yeah, we have looked at it. Our dealers have asked for it in the past. There's a couple questions that got to be looked at. One, is that our core competence? Right? And when you look at the competition that does multiple deliveries a day, we have 9 warehouses around the U.S., 2 in Canada, 1 in Mexico. You would probably need 50, 60 to cover 70, 80% of your network, and that money's never going to happen. Second, if a dealer gets a part, does he get it on the car within the next hour? Are our dealers structured to live with that level of service, right? So those are the types of things that happen. We've tried things in the past, dealers within 100 miles, I will do 2 to 3 times a day. Dealers within 50 miles, they'll come pick up, right? And you can cover about 40% of our network with those circles around the 9 buildings. Now you got to go talk to the 60% of the dealers that don't get it, and then it's viewed as competitive disadvantage. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Absolutely. One of the things you've had a big focus on for vehicle logistics is North America, NAR, the North America region. So integrating flows between Mexico and the US and Canada, and even having some sort of cross-functional regional responsibilities. Has there been a similar aspect in parts and service? Has it always been that way? How do you see that in comparison?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Once again, it gets culture. We did do it on the finished vehicle logistics side. I think we talked about it at a conference last year or the year before. We are looking at the exact same thing on the after-sale side, but there's a couple complexities that pop up on this side of the business. First, after-sales being profitable, all 3 countries are separate legal entities. Nobody wants to give up control of after-sales revenue and profit to a central entity, right? Because you want to maximize the region, great. But if it's at the detriment of one country, not so great, especially if you're the MD of that country. So there's a few more challenges on the after-sale side, but it is something that we are, let's give it a couple months. I think we will be there.
Exciting. Well, I'll be asking in a couple of months then. Finally, last
Not an announcement, by the way.
No. Final question for now. What do you see as the next gen level of service? How do you envision parts and service for Volkswagen Group in 2030? How do you want to evolve? What are some of the key goals to reach?
That's a great question. I don't have a clear-cut answer. I would hope that the Volkswagen Group continues to maintain customer service as number 1, and we continue to maintain our order to delivery service for all dealers at the same level, right? I think a couple things that could happen is we could have segmented or differentiated service, right? Do all dealers need overnight delivery? Volume-based, geography-based, right? You can have that conversation. It optimizes the network. Now, does that allow us to do some other things? Because dealers can still get parts overnight, right? So as long as that's there, I think differentiated service is on the table. And the second thing I think we just talked about a few minutes ago, what do you physically put in your building? What are you good at, right? As the number of models proliferates, the amount of sheet metal we have in our buildings is 40, 50% of the space. And that takes away from faster moving, smaller parts. And you got to ask yourself, are collision repairs overnight repairs? They're not. So do I need them physically in a building that can get the parts to every dealer overnight? So I think differentiated service for dealers is a topic that's on the table. And I think differentiated service by commodity is on the table.
Very interesting insights as always, Anu. Thank you so much for sharing with us. We already have a few things we'll be looking forward to follow up on, both on the parts and service and on the vehicle logistics side. Thanks so much for joining us here, and we look forward to sharing more with the audience at the next one. Thanks so much, Anu. Thank you.
Good to see you.